When my wife's father died, my lazy wife inherited his house and $33 million. Then she kicked me out saying, "Find somewhere else to live or die, I don't care. You're useless now." Days later, the lawyer laughed. "Did you even read the will?" My wife went pale because the will said, "You know what they say about death bringing out the worst in people?" Well, they weren't kidding. When my father-in-law Richard Hayes kicked the bucket last month, I figured it would be one of those somber family moments where everyone comes together, shares memories, and maybe learns to appreciate what they've got. Boy, was I living in fantasy land. Richard had been sick for months, pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't mess around. I'd spent countless evenings at his bedside, listening to his stories about building his business empire from scratch, watching old war movies with him when Clarissa was too busy to visit. The man had grit, I'll give him that. Came from nothing and built a fortune that would make most lottery winners weep with envy. $33 million, to be exact, plus that ridiculous mansion in the hills that looked like something out of a Hollywood movie. I thought maybe, just maybe, watching her father waste away would teach my wife Clarissa something about loss. See, I'd been through this dance before when both my parents died in a car crash 5 years ago. That grief nearly destroyed me. The kind of soul-crushing pain that makes you question everything you thought you knew about life. Clarissa had been, well, let's just say supportive isn't the word I'd use. More like mildly inconvenienced by my emotional breakdown. But Richard's death? That was supposed to be different. That was supposed to be her wake-up call about mortality and family and all that heavy stuff that makes people reevaluate their priorities. Instead, it was like Christmas morning for a spoiled brat who just discovered Santa left the entire toy store under the tree. The reading of the will was a joke. Clarissa sat there in her designer black dress, probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, with this smug little smile playing at the corners of her mouth. When the lawyer announced she'd inherited everything, the mansion, the money, the whole damn empire, she didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. Just nodded like she'd been expecting it all along. Which, knowing Clarissa, she probably had been. That's when things got really ugly. Within a week, my sweet, loving wife transformed into someone I barely recognized. Gone was the woman I'd married 7 years ago, the one who used to laugh at my stupid jokes and steal French fries off my plate. In her place was this cold, calculating stranger who looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. The mansion became her kingdom, and I was suddenly the court jester who'd outlived his usefulness. She started making suggestions about how I should find my own path, now that she was financially independent. Because apparently, inheriting millions gives you the right to treat your spouse like expired milk. Then came that evening 3 weeks ago. I'll never forget it as long as I live. I was in what used to be our bedroom, folding laundry like some kind of domestic servant, when Clarissa walked in wearing this ice-cold expression that could have frozen hell over. "We need to talk," she said. And brother, those 4 words have never meant anything good in the history of marriage. I looked up from the pile of shirts, trying to read her face. "What's on your mind, babe?" That's when she dropped the nuclear bomb that obliterated what was left of our marriage. "Find somewhere else to live, or die? I don't care. You're useless now." Just like that. No build-up, no explanation. No, it's not you. It's me bullshit. Just pure, unadulterated venom delivered with the emotional warmth of a parking meter. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, holding one of her silk blouses in my hands, trying to process what I'd just heard. "Excuse me. You heard me, Darianne. You're dead weight. I don't need you anymore. I have everything I want now, and you're just in the way." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. This was the woman I'd sacrificed everything for. The woman I'd worked 60-hour weeks to support while she found herself through yoga retreats and expensive hobbies. The woman I'd given up my own dreams for, turning down job opportunities and shelving my ambitions because her needs always came first. "Clarissa, what the hell has gotten into you? We're married. We took vows. Oh, please." She waved her hand dismissively, like she was shooing away an annoying fly. "Those vows were made when I needed you." Things change. I've changed. My circumstances have changed. You haven't. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of her brother-in-law Marcus lurking in the doorway with this satisfied smirk on his face. He'd been hanging around more and more since Richard's death, whispering poison in Clarissa's ear about how she deserved better, how she was meant for bigger things. The guy had always resented that I'd married into the family, like I was some kind of gold digger who'd tricked his way into their precious bloodline. So that's it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. 7 years of marriage, and you're throwing me away like garbage? Don't be so dramatic. I'm giving you an out. A fresh start. Consider it a favor. A favor. She thought destroying my life was a favor. That night, while Clarissa was out celebrating her new independence with Marcus and their country club friends, I packed my entire life into 2 beat-up suitcases and a cardboard box full of photos and mementos. 7 years of shared memories, reduced to 3 containers that barely filled the trunk of my old Honda Civic. I took one last look around the mansion that had never really felt like home anyway. The marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the pristine white furniture that screamed, "Don't touch anything." It was all hers now. The woman who'd once promised to love me in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, had just proven those words meant absolutely nothing when push came to shove. As I loaded my pathetic belongings into the car, I couldn't help but think about all the compromises I'd made, all the pieces of myself I'd given up to make her happy. The promotion I'd turned down because it would have meant relocating. The friends I'd lost touch with because Clarissa didn't approve of them. The hobbies I'd abandoned because they weren't sophisticated enough for her social circle. And for what? To be discarded the moment I was no longer useful? The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the casual cruelty of it all. She didn't even have the decency to pretend it was difficult for her. No tears, no apologies, no acknowledgement of what we'd shared. Just cold, calculated dismissal, like I was an employee being laid off from a job I'd never applied for. As I drove away from that mansion for what I thought would be the last time, I caught a glimpse of Clarissa in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching me leave like she was making sure the garbage truck had properly collected the trash. That image burned itself into my memory. My wife of 7 years, the woman I'd loved more than life itself, making absolutely certain that the man she'd deemed useless was finally out of her perfect new life. I had no idea that in just a few short weeks, that same image would come back to haunt her in ways she never could have imagined. Let me tell you about rock bottom. It smells like industrial-strength disinfectant mixed with the broken dreams of every poor bastard who's ever checked into the Sunset Motor Lodge. And brother, I was now the latest addition to that illustrious club of life's spectacular failures. The place looked exactly like what you'd expect from a joint that charged $39 a night and had a flickering neon sign that only managed to spell out Sue ETMOL on a good day. The parking lot was a graveyard of beat-up cars and questionable life choices, and mine fit right in with the rest of the automotive disasters. The desk clerk, a guy who looked like he'd seen more action than a war correspondent and cared about as much, barely looked up when I stumbled through the door with my 2 suitcases and box of memories. He just slid a key across the counter and grunted something that might have been room 12 or move your car. Honestly, the guy's communication skills weren't exactly Harvard level. Room 12 turned out to be a masterpiece of budget hospitality. The carpet was this charming shade of "what the hell happened here," and the wallpaper was peeling like a bad sunburn. The bed looked like it had been through more relationships than a Hollywood starlet, and the bathroom, well, let's just say I've seen crime scenes that were more inviting. But here's the kicker. This dump was paradise compared to the emotional wasteland I was living in. I collapsed onto that saga mattress that probably predated the Clinton administration and just lay there, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked suspiciously like either Jesus or maybe a really sad duck. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional sounds of domestic bliss from the adjoining rooms. You know, the kind of bliss that involves a lot of shouting and what sounded like someone getting acquainted with the furniture. That's when Clarissa's parting gift really started to eat at me. Before I'd packed my life into storage containers, she'd tossed me a handful of cash like I was some street performer who'd just butchered a Beatles song. "Here," she'd said, not even looking at me. "This should last you a few weeks until you figure out your next move." $300. 7 years of marriage, and I was worth $300 lousy dollars to her. I'd seen people tip more than that at fancy restaurants. But as I lay there listening to my upstairs neighbor apparently trying out for the Olympic furniture throwing team, something started gnawing at me. It wasn't just the humiliation or the betrayal, though those were doing a fine job of eating me alive from the inside. No, it was something else. Something that didn't add up. See, Richard Hayes wasn't the kind of guy who left things to chance. The man had been a perfectionist in everything. His business, his investments, hell, even the way he organized his sock drawer was like something out of a military handbook. He'd planned every detail of his empire with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, and he'd built it from the ground up through sheer determination and an almost obsessive attention to detail. So why the hell would a guy like that just dump his entire fortune on Clarissa and walk away? I'd spent enough time with Richard over the years to know how he really felt about his daughter. Don't get me wrong. He loved her, but he wasn't blind to her faults. The man had built a business empire through hard work and sacrifice, and Clarissa's biggest accomplishment was mastering the art of spending other people's money with Olympic-level skill. Richard used to joke about it, actually. That girl could burn through a fortune faster than Sherman went through Georgia. He'd say with this mix of affection and exasperation that only a parent could manage. He knew she was entitled, knew she was lazy, knew she had about as much business sense as a goldfish. So would a guy like that really just hand over everything to someone he knew would probably blow it all on designer handbags and European vacations? The more I thought about it, the more it bugged me. Richard had always been kind to me. Hell, more than kind. He'd treated me better than his own daughter had in the last few years. We'd bonded over old movies and war stories, and he'd actually listened when I talked about my dreams and ambitions, which was more than I could say for my own wife. There was this one conversation we'd had about 6 months before he got sick. We were sitting in his study, sharing a bottle of whiskey that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and he'd looked at me with these serious eyes and said, "Darian, you're a good man. Better than this family deserves, if I'm being honest." At the time, I just figured it was the whiskey talking. But now, lying in this Fleabag motel with nothing but time and regret for company, those words kept echoing in my head. The ceiling fan wheezed and clicked like it was on life support, and I found myself replaying every interaction I'd had with Richard in those final months. The way he'd looked at Clarissa sometimes, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. The comments he'd made about making sure the right people were taken care of. The way he'd always insisted on talking to me privately about important matters. Had I missed something? Had there been signs I was too caught up in my own misery to notice? By 3 a.m, I'd managed to convince myself I was losing it. Grief and desperation were making me see conspiracies where there were none. Clarissa had inherited everything fair and square, and I was just the discarded husband looking for some kind of cosmic justice that didn't exist in the real world. But when dawn finally crawled through those moth-eaten curtains, bringing with it the cheerful sounds of traffic and human misery, I made a decision. Call it curiosity, call it desperation, call it the last pathetic gasps of a man who'd lost everything. I was going to find out the truth. With the few dollars I had left after paying for another night in paradise, I dug out my phone and looked up the number for Charles Whitmore, Richard's longtime attorney. The man had been handling the Hayes family legal affairs for over 20 years, and if anyone knew the real story behind Richard's will, it would be him. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number. This was probably going to be the most embarrassing phone call of my life. The pathetic ex-son-in-law fishing for scraps, hoping against hope that maybe there was some kind of mistake, some tiny loophole that might throw me a lifeline. But something deep in my gut told me this wasn't over. Richard Hayes had been too smart, too careful, too damn strategic to leave his life's work in the hands of someone he knew would destroy it. And if I was right, if there was more to this story than Clarissa's triumphant inheritance, then maybe, just maybe, the man she'd called useless was about to prove just how wrong she'd been. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. When Charles Whitmore's receptionist finally answered, I took a deep breath and stepped into what I hoped wasn't just another dead end, but the beginning of something that might just change everything. Charles Whitmore's office was the kind of place that screamed old money from every mahogany-paneled surface. Walking through those doors felt like stepping into a different century, where handshake deals actually meant something and lawyers wore 3-piece suits because it was Tuesday, not because they were trying to impress anyone. The receptionist, a silver-haired woman who looked like she'd been guarding the gates of legal wisdom since the Eisenhower administration, informed me that Mr. Whitmore could see me immediately. That should have been my first clue that something was up. In my experience, lawyers don't just drop everything for broke guys who smell like cheap motel soap and desperation. But Charles? He greeted me like I was the prodigal son returning home for Christmas dinner. Darian, my boy. He practically jumped up from behind his massive desk, which was covered in more legal documents than a Supreme Court case. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your wife told me you'd left town. I stopped dead in my tracks. She told you what? Said you'd packed up and moved to, where was it? Arizona? Nevada? Somewhere out west, anyway. Said you wanted a fresh start after Richard's passing and didn't want to be contacted about any legal matters. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. That lying, scheming, backstabbing which had been intercepting my mail, screening my calls, basically erasing me from existence while she played queen of the castle. I should have been furious, but honestly, I was almost impressed by the sheer audacity of it all. Charles, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I've been staying at the Sunset Motor Lodge about 15 minutes from here. I never left town, and I sure as hell never told anyone I didn't want to be contacted. The old lawyer's eyebrows shot up so high they practically disappeared into his hairline. He walked over to a filing cabinet that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast and pulled out a thick manila folder with Richard's name on it. Son, we need to talk. And I mean right now. He gestured to the leather chair across from his desk, the kind of chair that probably cost more than my car and felt like sitting on a cloud made of butter and good intentions. Charles settled behind his desk with the folder in front of him, looking at me like he was about to deliver news that would either make my day or ruin my life. Darian, what exactly did Clarissa tell you about her father's will? That she inherited everything. The mansion, the money, the whole $33 million empire. Pretty cut and dried, according to her. Charles made a noise that sounded like a cross between a chuckle and a snort. Cut and dried. That's rich. He opened the folder and pulled out what looked like the original will, thick, official-looking papers with more seals and signatures than a peace treaty. Let me ask you something, son. Did you actually see this alleged will? Were you present at the reading? I thought back to that day. Clarissa had come home from the lawyer's office practically glowing with satisfaction, waving some papers around like she'd just won the lottery. But now that I really thought about it, no, I admitted. She said it was family business. That since I wasn't a blood relative, I didn't need to be there. She brought home copies of some documents, but I never saw the actual will. Copies. Charles shook his head like I'd just told him I'd bought the Brooklyn Bridge from a guy in a trench coat. Of course she did. He turned the will around so I could see it, and my heart started pounding like I'd just run a marathon. Even upside down, I could see my name mentioned multiple times throughout the document. Darian, according to Richard's actual last will and testament, the one he signed, witnessed, and notarized in this very office. You are the primary beneficiary of his estate. The words hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo of disbelief. I'm sorry, what? The mansion, 70% of his liquid assets, controlling interest in his business holdings. It's all yours, son. Every last penny of it. I stared at the document like it was written in ancient Sumerian. But Clarissa said. Clarissa was left $10 million, Charles continued, flipping through the pages. A very generous inheritance, mind you, but it came with conditions. What kind of conditions? Charles adjusted his reading glasses and found the relevant section. The bequest to Clarissa Hayes Morrison is contingent upon her treatment of her husband, Darian Morrison, following Richard's death. Should she fail to honor the bonds of marriage and treat her husband with the respect and dignity he deserves, said bequest shall be null and void, and those assets shall revert to the primary beneficiary. My mouth went dry. You're telling me that by throwing me out like yesterday's garbage, she forfeited her entire inheritance? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Charles leaned back in his chair with something that might have been satisfaction dancing in his eyes. Richard was very specific about this clause. He'd watched his daughter's behavior over the years, seen how she treated you, and he wanted to ensure that his money didn't enable her to become an even worse person than she already was. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. This is insane. Why didn't she know about this? Oh, but she did. Charles pulled out another document. A receipt showing that Clarissa had been provided with a complete copy of the will 3 days after the funeral. She received the full, unredacted will. She chose to ignore the conditions, probably thinking they were just her father's way of being dramatic from beyond the grave. So she gambled with $10 million and lost. Spectacularly. Charles couldn't hide his grin anymore. Richard always said his daughter was too arrogant for her own good. Turns out he was right. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what I was hearing. The woman who had called me useless, who had thrown me out like I was nothing more than unwanted furniture, had just handed me a fortune through her own cruelty and stupidity. "There's more," Charles said, and I wasn't sure my heart could take any more revelations. "Richard left you a personal message. He recorded it about a week before he died." He pulled out an old-fashioned tape recorder, the kind they probably used during the Nixon administration, and pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room, weak from illness but unmistakably determined. "Darian, if you're hearing this, it means my daughter has shown her true colors. I'm sorry, son. I tried to raise her better, but some people are just born selfish. You've been more of a family to me these past few years than she ever was. Take care of what I've built. Use it wisely. And don't let her guilt you into giving her a damn penny. She made her choice." The recording ended, and I sat there feeling like I'd just been hit by emotional lightning. In the span of 20 minutes, I'd gone from being a discarded husband living in a Fleabag motel to the heir of a multi-million-dollar empire. Charles was watching me carefully, probably wondering if I was going to pass out or start laughing maniacally. Honestly, I was considering both options. "So what happens now?" I finally managed to ask. "Now," Charles smiled like a shark who'd just spotted a school of particularly tasty fish. "Now we make this official. We freeze Clarissa's access to any funds she's already touched, transfer everything into your name, and watch as the woman who called you useless realizes just how spectacularly she's screwed herself." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. A real, genuine smile that came from somewhere deep inside my chest. "Charles," I said, "let's get started. You know that feeling when you're about to drop the hammer on someone who absolutely deserves it? That sweet, almost intoxicating moment when karma finally decides to clock in for work after taking the world's longest coffee break? Yeah, that's exactly where I was sitting in Charles Whitmore's office, signing documents that were about to turn my cheating, lying, gold-digging wife's world upside down. "I need you to understand," Charles said, his pen hovering over what looked like enough legal paperwork to choke a horse. "Once we set this in motion, there's no going back. Clarissa will lose access to everything. The accounts, the credit cards, the house, all of it. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want?" I thought about those 3 weeks in the Sunset Motor Lodge, listening to the sounds of other people's broken dreams through paper-thin walls. I thought about Clarissa's ice-cold eyes when she told me to find somewhere else to live or die. I thought about the casual cruelty with which she'd discarded 7 years of marriage like it was a subscription she didn't want anymore. "Charles," I said, putting pen to paper, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The first domino fell within an hour. Charles had this network of contacts that would make the CIA jealous, and he put every one of them to work. Bank accounts were frozen faster than a Minnesota lake in January. Credit cards were canceled with the efficiency of a Swiss train schedule. The utilities at the mansion, electricity, gas, water, internet, even the fancy security system, were all transferred back into my name by close of business. But the real kicker was Rosa Delgado. Rosa was a private investigator who looked like she could bench press a Buick and had a reputation for finding dirt on people that would make a tabloid journalist weep with envy. Charles had worked with her on dozens of cases over the years, and when he called her about investigating the forged documents Clarissa had been waving around, she was practically salivating over the phone. "Honey," she told me during our brief introduction, "I've seen some grade-A scumbags in my time, but a woman who forges her dead daddy's will to screw over her husband? That's a special kind of evil. This is going to be fun." By 5 o'clock that afternoon, Rosa had already uncovered enough evidence to sink Clarissa's little fraud scheme deeper than the Titanic. Turns out my dear wife had paid some 2-bit document forger named Jimmy the font Castellano to create a fake while using letterhead stolen from Charles's office. The guy apparently specialized in fake IDs for college kids, but Clarissa had convinced him to branch out into high-end document fraud for the low price of $50,000. The beautiful irony? She'd paid him with money from Richard's accounts, money that, according to the real will, she never had legal access to in the first place. It was like watching someone rob a bank with a gun they'd stolen from the same bank. While Rosa was busy building a case that would make the DA's office Christmas dreams come true, I decided to take a little drive. After 3 weeks of feeling like the world's biggest loser, I figured it was time to remind myself what winning felt like. I pulled up to the mansion just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn that probably cost more to maintain than most people's annual salaries. The house looked different somehow, smaller, less intimidating. Maybe that's what happens when you realize you actually own something instead of just visiting it. The front door was locked, but Charles had given me the new keys along with a smug little smile that suggested he'd been planning this moment for weeks. I let myself in like I owned the place, which, according to a stack of legal documents, I actually did. The sound of my footsteps echoed through the marble foyer, and I couldn't help but grin. 3 weeks ago, I'd been sneaking around this place like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. Now I was home. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of Clarissa having a complete and total meltdown in the kitchen. What do you mean the card was declined? That's impossible. I have millions in that account. I followed the sound of her voice, finding her standing next to the granite kitchen island with her phone pressed to her ear and her face red with the kind of fury that usually precedes someone getting slapped with a restraining order. Yes, I'll hold. She snapped at whatever poor customer service representative had drawn the short straw. She was wearing one of her designer outfits, the kind that cost more than most people's cars, but her usual perfect composure was cracking like cheap paint. That's when she noticed me standing in the doorway, and her face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a lightning storm. Darian. Her voice was small, confused, like she was seeing a ghost. What are you doing here? I live here, I said, pulling out the keys and jingling them just to watch her face contort with confusion. Remember? This is my house. Your house? What the hell are you talking about? I inherited. You inherited jack shit, Clarissa. I walked over to the kitchen counter and leaned against it like I owned the place, which I did. Turns out your daddy left you a nice little allowance, but it came with strings attached. Strings you cut the moment you decided I was useless. Her phone was still connected to customer service, and I could hear a tinny voice asking if she was still there. She hung up with the kind of violence usually reserved for fly swatters and tennis rackets. That's impossible. I read the will. Everything was left to me. You read a forgery, sweetheart. A really expensive, really illegal forgery that's about to land you in more trouble than a turkey at Thanksgiving dinner. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. You're lying. Am I? Check your credit cards again. Try to access your bank accounts. Hell, try to turn on the lights when it gets dark. See what happens when the electric company doesn't get paid. As if on cue, her phone started ringing. The caller ID showed her personal banker's name, and she answered it with the kind of desperation you usually see in disaster movies. Richard, thank God you called. There's been some terrible mistake with my accounts. What? Frozen? What do you mean frozen? I watched her face cycle through the 5 stages of grief in fast forward. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally, a kind of stunned acceptance that suggested her brain was finally catching up to reality. But I'm Richard Hayes' daughter. I inherited. What do you mean I need to speak to my lawyer? She hung up and stared at me like I'd just grown a second head. For the first time since I'd known her, Clarissa was completely, utterly speechless. Here's the thing, babe, I said, savoring every word like fine wine. Your father knew exactly what kind of person you were. He left you $10 million, more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes, but only if you could manage to treat your husband like a human being for 5 minutes. You couldn't even do that. Her phone rang again, then again, and again. Every bank, every credit card company, every financial institution she'd been bleeding dry was suddenly very interested in having a conversation about her account status. I headed toward the door, then stopped and turned back to her. She was still standing there in shock, her phone buzzing with the sound of her entire financial world imploding. Oh, and Clarissa? I said, my hand on the doorknob. You might want to call a lawyer. A good one. Because forgery and fraud are felonies. And I hear orange really isn't your color. As I walked out of what was now officially my house, I could hear her screaming my name behind me. But for the first time in weeks, the sound of Clarissa's voice didn't fill me with dread. It sounded like music. 2 days. That's how long it took for Clarissa's carefully constructed world of luxury and entitlement to come crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. And let me tell you, watching it happen was better than Christmas morning, the Super Bowl, and finding $20 in an old jacket pocket all rolled into one beautiful, karma-soaked package. I'd been staying at a decent hotel downtown. Nothing fancy, but a hell of an upgrade from the Sunset Motor Lodge and its symphony of human misery. Charles had advanced me some funds from the estate, enough to get a room with actual hot water and a bed that didn't feel like it was stuffed with broken dreams and regret. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using Clarissa's inheritance money to pay for my temporary accommodations. My phone had been ringing nonstop since the financial apocalypse began. Clarissa, her mother Eleanor, her worthless brother-in-law Marcus, even some of her country club friends. They were all calling with increasingly frantic messages that ranged from confused to desperate to downright threatening. I'd listened to a few of them just for the entertainment value, but mostly I just let them pile up like snow in a blizzard. The best one was from Clarissa herself, left at 2:30 in the morning on day one. Darian, there's some kind of horrible mistake. Daddy left everything to me, not you. You can't seriously believe that senile old lawyer over your own wife. Call me back immediately. We need to fix this before it gets out of hand. By day two, the tone had shifted considerably. Darian, please, you have to stop this insanity. I'm still your wife, for God's sake. Whatever Charles Whitmore told you, it's wrong. Daddy would never do this to me. He loved me. I was his little girl. That one actually made me laugh out loud. Richard's little girl, who couldn't be bothered to visit him during his final months unless she needed something. But I wasn't ready to face her yet. I needed time to process everything, to wrap my head around the fact that I'd gone from motel-dwelling reject to multimillionaire in the span of 48 hours. So I took a little vacation from reality, ordering room service and watching pay-per-view movies while Rosa Delgado and Charles Whitmore systematically dismantled every aspect of Clarissa's fraudulent little empire. Rosa called me with updates that were better than any soap opera. Your wife tried to withdraw cash from 3 different ATMs yesterday, she told me with obvious glee in her voice. When that didn't work, she went into the bank and made such a scene that they had to call security. Apparently, she demanded to speak to the president of the bank and accused them of conspiring against her. Please tell me someone got that on video. Honey, this is the digital age. Everything's on video. I've got enough footage to make a reality show called When Rich Girls Go Broke. Charles had been busy too, filing all the necessary paperwork to make the inheritance transfer official and working with the district attorney's office to build a fraud case against Clarissa that would make Al Capone's tax evasion charges look like a parking ticket. The beautiful thing about your wife, he told me during one of our daily check-ins, is that she's been so arrogant about this whole scheme that she left a paper trail a blind man could follow. She paid the forger with a check, for crying out loud. A check from Richard's account. But by the morning of day 3, I decided it was time to go home. Not to visit, not to negotiate, not to see if we could work things out like some kind of delusional marriage counselor might suggest. I was going home to claim what was rightfully mine and to look my lying, cheating, fraud-committing wife in the eye while I did it. The mansion looked different in the morning light, less intimidating, more like what it actually was, my house. I used my key to walk through the front door like I owned the place, which I did, and found Clarissa exactly where I expected her to be. In the living room, surrounded by empty wine bottles and tissues, looking like the aftermath of a very exclusive natural disaster. She'd clearly been crying for hours, maybe days. Her usually perfect hair looked like she'd been through a blender, her designer makeup was streaked down her face like war paint, and she was wearing the same clothes from 2 days ago, which for Clarissa was like showing up to church in a bikini. When she saw me, she practically launched herself off the couch with the kind of desperate energy you usually see in zombie movies. Darian, thank God you're here. I've been trying to reach you for days. There's been this terrible mistake, and we need to fix it right now before everything gets completely out of control. I stayed by the doorway, keeping a safe distance between myself and the woman who was quickly transforming from ice queen to hot mess. There's no mistake, Clarissa. Everything's working exactly the way it's supposed to. No, she said, shaking her head like she could will reality to change through sheer stubbornness. Daddy left everything to me. I'm his daughter, his blood. You were just married into the family. Just married into the family. I repeated, letting the words hang in the air like smoke from a house fire. Is that what I was to you? Just some outsider who happened to put a ring on your finger? That's not what I meant. But her eyes said otherwise. I meant that, legally speaking, blood relations usually get screwed over by their own greed. I finished for her. Your father knew exactly what kind of person you were, Clarissa. He gave you a choice. Treat your husband with basic human decency and inherit $10 million. Or be the selfish, cruel person you've always been and get nothing. You chose nothing. That's when she tried a different approach. The waterworks kicked into high gear, and suddenly she was the grieving daughter who'd just lost her father and couldn't understand how the world could be so cruel to her. I'm still your wife, she whispered, moving closer with those big, tear-filled eyes that had probably gotten her out of trouble since she was 5 years old. We took vows, Darien, for better or worse, remember? In sickness and in health. I remember, I said, pulling out my phone and opening the voice recording app. I also remember you telling me to find somewhere else to live or die because I was useless. Would you like to hear it again? I pressed play, and her own voice filled the room with all the warmth and compassion of a glacier. Find somewhere else to live or die. I don't care. You're useless now. The sound of her own cruelty playing back to her was like watching someone get slapped by their own reflection. She stood there frozen, listening to herself destroy our marriage with surgical precision. That wasn't. I was upset. I wasn't thinking clearly. You can't judge our entire marriage based on one moment. I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. Clarissa, you spent 3 weeks treating me like garbage. You told everyone I'd left town so they wouldn't contact me about legal matters. You forged legal documents and committed fraud. This wasn't one moment. This was who you really are when you thought you held all the cards. That's when I pulled out the recording device Charles had given me, the one with Richard's message. I set it on the coffee table between us like I was placing evidence at a crime scene. Your father left you something else besides that inheritance you threw away, I said, pressing play. Richard's voice filled the room, weak from illness but strong in conviction. Darien, if you're hearing this, it means my daughter has shown her true colors. I'm sorry, son. I tried to raise her better, but some people are just born selfish. You've been more of a family to me these past few years than she ever was. Clarissa collapsed back onto the couch like someone had cut her strings. The sound of her father's disappointment, his clear preference for me over her, hit her harder than any legal document ever could. He can't have meant that, she whispered. He was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was thinking clearly enough to set up a will that protected me from exactly what you did to me, I said. He knew you'd show your true colors the moment you thought you had power over me. And you did exactly what he expected. For the first time in our entire marriage, I was the one in control. I was the one with the power, the money, the upper hand. And Clarissa, the woman who had called me useless and thrown me away like garbage, was the one begging. It was the sweetest feeling I'd ever experienced. Just when I thought the circus couldn't get any more entertaining, the ringmaster herself decided to make a grand entrance. Eleanor Hayes, Clarissa's mother and the undisputed queen of looking down her nose at people she considered beneath her social status, showed up at my front door like some kind of well-dressed avenging angel with a Chanel purse and enough jewelry to fund a small country's defense budget. I was in Richard's old study, my study now, going through some of his business files when I heard the commotion downstairs. Actually, commotion might be putting it mildly. It sounded more like someone was trying to stage a hostile takeover of my foyer, complete with shouting, dramatic gestures, and what I could only assume were threats involving expensive lawyers and social ruin. Where is he? Eleanor's voice carried through the mansion like she was addressing the Roman Senate. Where is that opportunistic little weasel who's trying to steal my daughter's birthright? Charming. Always nice to know what your in-laws really think of you. I made my way downstairs to find Eleanor standing in the middle of the living room like she was posing for a portrait entitled Rich Woman Having a Meltdown. She was wearing one of those outfits that screams, I have more money than God, and I want everyone to know it. A designer suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, pearls that looked like they could choke a horse, and enough diamonds to blind a small aircraft. Clarissa was hovering nearby, looking like a scolded child who'd called mommy to fix her problems. Which, let's face it, was exactly what had happened. "Ah, Eleanor," I said, walking into my own living room like I belonged there, which I did. "What a pleasant surprise. To what do I owe this visit?" She turned to face me with the kind of look that could freeze hell over, her perfectly made-up face twisted into an expression of pure disdain. "You know exactly why I'm here, you little gold-digging parasite." "Parasite?" I laughed, settling into Richard's favorite armchair, my favorite armchair now. That's rich, coming from a woman whose entire family has been living off Richard's money for the past 30 years. Her face went through more color changes than a sunset, but she managed to compose herself with the kind of self-control that only comes from decades of practice at being condescending to people she considers inferior. "Let's skip the pleasantries, shall we?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook that looked like it had seen more action than a war correspondent. "I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer to resolve this misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling fraud now? How very upper class of you." She ignored my comment and started writing out a check with the kind of flourish usually reserved for signing peace treaties. $2 million, she announced, tearing off the check and holding it up like it was the Holy Grail. "More money than you've ever seen in your pathetic little life. Take it, sign whatever papers need to be signed to return my daughter's inheritance, and disappear from our lives forever." I stared at the check, then at Eleanor, then back at the check. The woman was serious. She actually thought she could buy me off like some kind of discount hitman. $2 million, I repeated slowly, like I was savoring each word. "That's your opening offer?" Her eyes lit up with the kind of predatory satisfaction that suggested she thought she'd found my price. "I knew you'd see reason. You always struck me as a practical man, despite your humble origins." "Oh, I am practical," I said, standing up and walking over to her. "Practically insulted that you think I'm stupid enough to trade a $33 million inheritance for pocket change." The confident smile slipped from her face like makeup in a rainstorm. "Excuse me. You heard me. Your daughter forged legal documents to try to steal my inheritance. Your dead husband left me everything because he knew exactly what kind of people his family really were. And now you're trying to bribe me into giving up what's legally mine. The balls on you people are absolutely astronomical." Eleanor's composure cracked like cheap paint. She grabbed the check back and started writing furiously. $5 million, she snapped, practically throwing the new check at me. "That's more than enough to set you up for life. You could buy a nice little house somewhere far away from here and live comfortably for the rest of your miserable existence." I picked up the check, looked at it for exactly 2 seconds, then tore it in half. The sound of expensive paper ripping seemed to echo through the room like a gunshot. "Lady, you could offer me $50 million and the answer would still be no. This isn't about money. This is about justice. Your daughter treated me like garbage, threw me away like I was nothing, and tried to steal from me using forged documents. Now she gets to live with the consequences." That's when Eleanor's mask finally came off completely. The polite society matron disappeared, replaced by something that looked like it belonged in a nature documentary about apex predators. "You ungrateful little worm," she hissed, her voice dropping to the kind of whisper that usually precedes someone getting shanked in a prison yard. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. Richard may have built this empire, but the Hayes family has connections you can't even imagine. We have friends in places that could make your life very, very difficult." "Is that a threat, Eleanor?" "It's a promise." She stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of expensive perfume mixed with something that smelled suspiciously like desperation. "You think you've won because you have some legal documents? Money and power are about more than paperwork, you pathetic little man. They're about influence, connections, the ability to make problems disappear." She paused for dramatic effect, clearly expecting me to start trembling with fear or begging for mercy. Instead, I just stood there looking mildly amused, which seemed to piss her off even more. "Richard built his fortune through some very questionable business practices," she continued, her smile returning with the kind of cold satisfaction that suggested she thought she'd just played her ace. "Offshore accounts, shell companies, payments to people who prefer to remain anonymous. The kind of business dealings that attract attention from federal agencies, if you know what I mean." Now she had my attention. "What are you saying?" I'm saying that if the right people started looking into Richard's financial history, they might find some very interesting irregularities. The kind of irregularities that could tie up an estate in legal proceedings for years, maybe decades. The kind that could result in asset forfeiture, criminal investigations, maybe even prison time for anyone foolish enough to benefit from ill-gotten gains. My blood ran cold. Was she talking about money laundering, tax evasion, or something even worse? Of course, Eleanor continued, clearly enjoying the look of concern that must have crossed my face. These are just rumors. Whispers. The kind of thing that would never see the light of day if reasonable people could reach a reasonable agreement. She pulled out her checkbook again, this time writing with slow, deliberate strokes. $10 million, she said, holding up the check like it was a peace treaty. Take the money, sign the papers, walk away clean. Because if you don't, I promise you'll spend the rest of your life wishing you had. I stared at the check, then at Eleanor's smug face, then at Clarissa, who was watching this whole exchange like it was a tennis match where her entire future depended on the outcome. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt a flicker of doubt. What if Eleanor was telling the truth? What if Richard's empire really was built on something illegal? What if I was about to inherit a fortune that would destroy my life instead of saving it? But as I stood there in that room, surrounded by the wealth and luxury that Richard had built through decades of hard work, I realized something important. Eleanor Hayes was desperate. Desperate people say desperate things, make desperate threats, and desperate promises. And if there's one thing I'd learned from my years of being married into this family, it's that desperate rich people are often the most dangerous kind. Eleanor, I said finally, my voice steady despite the tornado of doubts swirling in my chest. I think it's time for you to leave my house. Her face went white with rage. Your house? This will never be your house, you pathetic. Get out, I said, walking to the front door and holding it open. Now, as she stormed past me, her pearls clicking together like angry castanets, she stopped and turned back one last time. This isn't over, she whispered. Not by a long shot. And as I watched her drive away in her ridiculously expensive car, I couldn't shake the feeling that she might be right. Eleanor's threats echoed in my head like a bad song you can't shake, the kind that plays on repeat until you want to take a sledgehammer to your radio. After she'd stormed out of my house with all the dignity of a pissed-off peacock, I found myself standing in Richard's study, my study, staring at filing cabinets full of business documents that suddenly felt less like treasure chests and more like potential Pandora's boxes. Was I sitting on a fortune built from blood money? Had the man I'd respected, the father-in-law who'd treated me better than his own daughter ever had, been running some kind of criminal enterprise under the cover of legitimate business? The possibility made my stomach churn like a washing machine full of regret and bad decisions. I called Charles first, because if anyone would know about skeletons in Richard's closet, it would be his lawyer of 20 years. Eleanor came to see me today, I told him without preamble. She made some interesting allegations about Richard's business practices, something about offshore accounts and federal agencies. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that usually means someone's either dead or thinking very carefully about what they're going to say next. Darian, Charles said finally, I think we need to meet. In person. And we need to bring Rosa. That didn't sound ominous at all. 2 hours later, we were gathered in Charles's office like some kind of legal war council. Rosa had brought a laptop and enough files to stock a small library, while Charles looked like a man who was about to perform surgery on his own reputation. Before we go any further, Charles began, I need you to understand something. Everything I'm about to tell you is protected by attorney-client privilege, both with Richard and now with you as his heir. But Eleanor isn't entirely wrong. My heart sank faster than the Titanic in an ice storm. So Richard was dirty? Not dirty, Rosa interjected, pulling up what looked like bank records on her laptop. More like creatively accounting for his civic responsibilities. What the hell does that mean? Charles leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples like he was trying to massage away a decades-old headache. It means Richard was very good at finding legal ways to avoid paying taxes. Offshore shell companies, creative consulting contracts, payments to entities that existed primarily on paper. Nothing illegal, mind you, but definitely operating in the gray areas of financial law. Rosa turned her laptop around so I could see the screen. It showed a web of interconnected companies with names like Hayes International Consulting and Meridian Holdings LLC and Apex Strategic Solutions. The kind of generic business names that sound important but don't actually tell you what the hell they do. Your father-in-law was brilliant, she continued. He set up a network of companies that basically allowed him to shuffle money around like a three-card money dealer, always staying just on the right side of legal while minimizing his tax obligations to the point where the IRS probably wanted to send him a thank you card for the creative accounting lessons. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the financial spiderweb Richard had apparently spent decades weaving. So this is all legal? Technically? Yes, Charles said. Ethically questionable? Absolutely. The kind of thing that would attract unwanted attention from federal agencies if someone decided to make noise about it? You bet. That's when it hit me. Eleanor wasn't threatening to expose criminal activity. She was threatening to expose aggressive tax avoidance strategies that, while legal, would tie up Richard's estate in investigations and audits for years. She was trying to make my inheritance so toxic that I'd walk away just to avoid the hassle. So what you're telling me, I said slowly, is that Richard was basically a financial ninja who figured out how to legally screw the government out of tax money, and Eleanor's threatening to rat him out to cause me headaches? In layman's terms? Pretty much, Rosa grinned. Your father-in-law was playing 4D chess, while everyone else was playing checkers. But something still bothered me. If this is all above board, why would Eleanor think it could destroy me? Why would she be so confident that exposing it would get me to back down? Charles and Rosa exchanged a look that made my anxiety spike like a heart monitor in an emergency room. Because, Charles said carefully, there's one more thing you need to know. He pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the others and sealed with enough legal tape to suggest its contents were either extremely important or extremely dangerous. 3 months before Richard died, he came to see me, not about his will, not about his medical condition, but about this. He gestured to the sealed folder. He said he'd been contacted by someone from the Treasury Department, someone asking questions about his business practices. The room suddenly felt about 20 degrees colder. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests someone had been looking very closely at his financial activities for a very long time, Rosa said. The kind that suggests maybe Richard's creative accounting had finally attracted the wrong kind of attention. But here's the thing, Charles continued, breaking the seal on the folder with the solemnity usually reserved for reading last rites. Richard wasn't worried about the investigation. In fact, he seemed almost relieved. He pulled out a stack of documents that looked official enough to make my palms sweat. Treasury Department letterhead, FBI insignias, the kind of government paperwork that either means you're about to get a medal or about to get arrested. Darian, Charles said, looking me straight in the eye. Richard had been working with federal authorities for over 2 years. Everything you're inheriting, the money, the businesses, all of it, was part of an authorized operation to track down actual money launderers and tax evaders. I felt like someone had just told me that gravity was optional and the sky was actually purple. You're telling me Richard was an undercover agent? Not exactly, Rosa said, taking over the explanation with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested she'd been dying to tell this story. More like a very well-compensated informant. The Fed suspected that some of Richard's business associates were using similar shell company setups for actual criminal purposes, drug money, human trafficking, the really nasty stuff. They needed someone on the inside who understood how these financial networks operated. She pulled up another screen on her laptop, this one showing what looked like an organizational chart that would make a conspiracy theorist weep with joy. For 2 years, Richard fed information to the Treasury Department and the FBI about suspicious financial activities in his business circles. Every questionable transaction, every shady deal, every offshore account that smelled fishy, he documented it all and handed it over to the authorities. Charles leaned forward, and for the first time since I'd known him, the old lawyer looked genuinely excited. The beautiful part is that Eleanor has no idea. She thinks she's threatening to expose Richard's crimes. But what she'd actually be exposing is a federal investigation that resulted in the arrests of 15 major financial criminals and the seizure of over $100 million in illegal assets. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process the fact that my supposedly crooked father-in-law had actually been Batman in a business suit, fighting financial crime from the inside, while maintaining the perfect cover of a slightly shady businessman. So when Eleanor threatens to expose Richard's dark secrets, I said slowly, she's actually threatening to expose herself as the daughter of a federal informant who helped take down a criminal network? Exactly, Rosa grinned. The woman is basically threatening to shoot herself in the foot with a cannon. But even as relief washed over me like a cool breeze on a hot day, another thought occurred to me. If Richard was working with the feds and Eleanor doesn't know about it, then she's about to walk into a trap of her own making. Charles finished. And we're going to let her. For the first time in days, I smiled. A real, genuine, from the bottom of my soul smile. My father-in-law hadn't just left me a fortune, he'd left me a legacy of justice. And his family was about to learn that some games are rigged from the start. You know what they say about the best-laid plans of mice and men? Well, sometimes those plans involve wearing a wire to dinner with your lying, scheming ex-wife and her equally crooked mother while federal agents listen in from a van parked outside your house. Not exactly what I'd pictured when I signed up for marriage 7 years ago, but life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs when you're expecting fastballs. After discovering that Richard had been working with the feds, Charles made a phone call that changed everything. Within 6 hours, I was sitting across from Agent Sylvia Martinez of the FBI, a woman who looked like she could bench press a Buick and had the kind of no-nonsense attitude that made you want to confess to crimes you'd never even thought about committing. "Mr. Morrison," she said, settling into the chair across from me in Charles's office. "Your father-in-law was instrumental in helping us build cases against some very dangerous people. His cooperation led to multiple arrests and the seizure of significant criminal assets." "So I've been told," I said, still trying to wrap my head around the idea that Richard had been living a double life as some kind of financial superhero. "But what does that have to do with me?" Agent Martinez smiled, and it was the kind of smile that usually preceded someone having a very bad day. "Your wife and mother-in-law are about to make a very big mistake. They're going to try to blackmail you with information about Richard's business dealings, not knowing that everything they think they know about him is exactly what we wanted his criminal associates to believe." She pulled out a small device that looked like something out of a spy movie, the kind of wire that probably cost more than my old car and was about as sophisticated as a NASA satellite. "We'd like you to wear this during your next conversation with them. Let them make their threats. Let them try to extort you. Let them dig themselves deeper into a hole they don't even know they're standing in." I stared at the device like it might bite me. "You want me to set up my own wife?" "Mr. Morrison, your wife forged legal documents, committed fraud, and is now attempting to extort money from you using false information about federal investigations. She set herself up. We're just giving her enough rope to hang herself with." Charles leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with the kind of mischief that suggested he'd been looking forward to this moment for years. "Darian, think about it. Clarissa threw you away like garbage when she thought she had all the power. Now she's about to discover what real power looks like." That evening, I was back at the mansion, wearing a wire that felt like it was burning a hole through my chest. The FBI surveillance van was parked 3 houses down, disguised as a cable repair truck. Agent Martinez and her team were listening to every word through equipment that could probably pick up a whisper from orbit. Right on schedule, Clarissa and Eleanor showed up at my front door like a pair of well-dressed vultures circling a particularly appetizing carcass. They'd clearly coordinated their outfits. Eleanor in her usual armor of pearls and entitlement, Clarissa in a black dress that was probably supposed to make her look grieving and sympathetic, but mostly just made her look like she was attending her own funeral. "Darian," Clarissa said as I let them in, "thank you for agreeing to see us. I know things have been difficult between us lately." "Difficult," I repeated, leading them into the living room. "Is that what we're calling attempted fraud now?" Eleanor shot me a look that could have frozen hell over twice. "Let's dispense with the hostile theatrics, shall we? We're here to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement." They'd brought a briefcase. An actual briefcase, like we were conducting some kind of arms deal in a Cold War spy novel. Eleanor set it on the coffee table with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for signing peace treaties. "Inside this case," she announced with all the drama of a game show host, "are copies of documents that prove your precious Richard was involved in some very questionable business practices. Money laundering, tax evasion, payments to entities that the IRS would find very, very interesting. She opened the briefcase to reveal stacks of papers that looked official enough to fool someone who didn't know any better. Bank statements, wire transfer records, correspondence with shell companies. It was an impressive collection of evidence that would have been devastating if it weren't exactly what the federal government had wanted Richard's associates to see. These documents, Clarissa chimed in, clearly reading from a script they'd rehearsed, could tie up Daddy's estate in federal investigations for decades. Every penny you think you've inherited could be frozen, seized, or forfeited as the proceeds of criminal activity. I played my part perfectly, letting my face show just enough concern to keep them talking. What exactly are you proposing? A simple trade, Eleanor said, pulling out a contract that looked like it had been drafted by the devil's own legal team. You sign over the estate to Clarissa, we make these documents disappear forever, and everyone walks away clean. And if I refuse? Eleanor's smile was sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. Then copies of these documents find their way to the IRS, the FBI, the Treasury Department, and every financial crimes unit on the Eastern Seaboard. Your life becomes a living hell of audits, investigations, and legal fees that would bankrupt a small country. Clarissa leaned forward with the kind of fake sympathy that made my skin crawl. We don't want to hurt you, Darien. We're trying to protect you from something that could destroy your life. Take the settlement, walk away with enough money to live comfortably, and forget this whole nightmare ever happened. How much? I asked, making my voice sound defeated. $5 million, Eleanor said promptly. More than generous for someone in your position. My position? Someone who's about to inherit a criminal empire, Clarissa said, her mask slipping just enough to show the venom underneath. Someone who's too stupid to realize that he's walking into a trap that could land him in federal prison. That was the moment I knew they'd sealed their fate. Extortion, threats, conspiracy to commit fraud. Agent Martinez was probably taking notes faster than a court stenographer on amphetamines. You know what? I said, standing up and walking to the window where I could see the fake cable truck in the distance. I think I need some time to consider your generous offer. Time. Eleanor's voice rose to the kind of pitch usually reserved for dog whistles. You don't have time. Every day you delay increases the risk that someone else discovers what we know. Maybe a week, I said, turning back to face them. Just to get my affairs in order, make sure I understand all the implications. That's when Eleanor lost it completely. The polite society matron vanished, replaced by something that belonged in a nature documentary about predatory reptiles. You listen to me, you ungrateful little parasite, she hissed, standing up so fast she knocked over her chair. We're offering you a way out of this mess, and you're going to take it. Because if you don't, I will personally make sure that your pathetic life becomes a living nightmare. I have friends in the federal government, friends who owe me favors, friends who would be very interested to know about Richard's criminal activities. Criminal activities, I repeated calmly, such as money laundering. Clarissa practically shouted. Tax evasion, conspiracy, fraud. Everything in that briefcase proves that Daddy was a criminal, and you're about to inherit the proceeds of his crimes. That's when the front door burst open like something out of an action movie. Agent Martinez and 3 other federal agents swept into the room with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested they'd done this dance before. FBI, Martinez announced, her weapon drawn but pointed at the floor. Everyone stay where you are. The look on Eleanor's face was priceless, like she'd just discovered that gravity was optional and she was about to fall upward into space. Clarissa actually screamed, a high-pitched sound that probably scared every dog in a 3-block radius. Eleanor Hayes, Martinez continued, producing handcuffs with the kind of professional efficiency that suggested she really enjoyed her job. You're under arrest for attempted extortion, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of a federal investigation. Obstruction? Eleanor sputtered as the cuffs clicked into place. What federal investigation? The one your husband was helping us conduct for the past 2 years, Martinez replied with obvious satisfaction. The one that resulted in multiple arrests and significant asset seizures. The one you just tried to blackmail his heir about. Clarissa was next, her cuffs applied while she screamed about lawyers and constitutional rights, and how this was all a terrible mistake. But as they led her toward the door, she turned back to me with a look of pure, undiluted hatred. You set us up, she spat. You betrayed your own wife. I looked her straight in the eye as Agent Martinez read her rights. Clarissa, you tried to erase me from existence. You forged legal documents, committed fraud, and then tried to extort me when that didn't work. I didn't betray you. I just let you hang yourself with your own rope. As they loaded my ex-wife and her mother into the back of federal vehicles, I couldn't help but think about that first night in the Sunset Motor Lodge when I'd thought my life was over. Turned out it was just beginning. The federal courthouse looked like something out of a legal drama. All marble columns and imposing architecture designed to make you feel simultaneously awed by the majesty of justice and terrified that you might be on the wrong side of it. I was sitting in Agent Martinez's office 3 days after the arrests, watching her flip through a file thick enough to stop a small caliber bullet while she explained exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. Your wife and mother-in-law. She began with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for people who've just solved a particularly difficult crossword puzzle, managed to confess to multiple federal crimes in under 10 minutes. It's actually impressive in its own way, like watching someone set a world record for self-destruction. The recording of that night played on her computer, and hearing Clarissa's voice admitting to forgery and extortion felt surreal, like watching a movie where the villain accidentally confesses to everything while thinking they're being clever. But here's what they didn't know, Martinez continued, pulling out another folder that looked even more official than the last one. What nobody knew, except for me, my direct supervisor, and Richard himself. She opened the folder to reveal photographs, surveillance reports, financial records, and what looked like enough documentation to write a novel about financial crime in America. At the center of it all was Richard's face, looking exactly like the man I'd known, serious, determined, and apparently living the kind of double life that would make James Bond jealous. Darian, your father-in-law wasn't just helping us catch financial criminals. He was the key to dismantling one of the largest money laundering operations on the East Coast. I stared at the photographs showing Richard at various business meetings, restaurants, and what looked like some kind of exclusive club where people wore suits that cost more than most cars. He was undercover? Not exactly undercover. More like a cooperating witness with access. See, about 3 years ago, Richard came to us. Not the other way around. He'd figured out that some of his business associates were using shell companies similar to his own for genuinely criminal purposes. She pulled out a chart that looked like something you'd see in a crime movie. Names connected by red string, photographs of stern-looking men in expensive suits, and financial flows that resembled a spider web designed by someone with a PhD in complexity theory. Marcus Valdez, Tommy the Fish Marconi, Elena Kozlova. These people weren't just avoiding taxes like Richard. They were washing money for drug cartels, human trafficking operations, and arms dealers. We're talking about billions of dollars in criminal proceeds flowing through legitimate-looking businesses. The names meant nothing to me, but the photographs did. I recognized a few faces from Richard's social events. Men who'd seemed perfectly respectable at charity galas and country club dinners. Men who'd shaken my hand and asked about my golf game while apparently running criminal enterprises on the side. Richard could have just walked away, Martinez continued. Could have kept his mouth shut and his hands clean. Instead, he came to us and said he wanted to help bring them down. She pulled out what looked like a personal letter, handwritten on Richard's familiar stationery. He wrote this after his cancer diagnosis, about 6 months before he died. It's part of the case file now, but I think you should read it. I took the letter with hands that weren't quite steady. Richard's handwriting was still strong despite his illness, and reading his words felt like having a conversation with a ghost. Agent Martinez, I know I don't have much time left, and there are things I need to make sure you understand. I didn't cooperate with your investigation because I was afraid of going to prison, or because I wanted some kind of deal for myself. I did it because I realized that my pursuit of financial advantage had put me in the same circles as genuinely evil people, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to stop them. Asterisk. I've built a fortune through legal but ethically questionable means. I won't pretend otherwise. But these people, Valdez, Marconi, the others, they profit from human suffering in ways that make my tax avoidance look like jaywalking. If my information can help put them behind bars, then maybe some good can come from the mistakes I've made. Asterisk. I'm leaving everything to Darian because he's the only person in my family who has genuine integrity. My daughter has become everything I hoped she wouldn't: entitled, cruel, and willing to hurt others for personal gain. My wife Eleanor has enabled that behavior for years. But Darian, he's a good man who deserves better than the family he married into. Asterisk. Please make sure he understands that every dollar he inherits is legitimate, not just legally, but morally. The government has verified that all assets in my estate come from lawful sources. He doesn't need to feel guilty about benefiting from my cooperation with your investigation. He's earning it by being the kind of person worthy of inheriting it. Asterisk. Use him well, Agent Martinez. He's stronger than he knows. Asterisk. I set the letter down with tears I didn't realize I'd been holding back. Richard hadn't just left me money, he'd left me vindication. Proof that someone had seen my worth when everyone else, including myself, had written me off as useless. The beautiful irony, Martinez said with a grin that suggested she'd been saving this revelation for last, is that Eleanor's threats were completely backwards. Every criminal activity she thought she could expose Richard for was actually part of an authorized federal operation. Every shell company, every questionable transaction, every offshore account, we knew about it, approved it, and used it to build our case. She pulled out a final document, this one with Department of Justice letterhead and enough official seals to stock a government supply closet. This is a letter of commendation for Richard Hayes, recognizing his contribution to Operation Clearwater, the investigation that led to 17 arrests, the seizure of $347 million in criminal assets, and the disruption of multiple international criminal enterprises. 17 arrests, including some very big fish who are now looking at decades in federal prison. Your father-in-law's information helped us map their entire operation, track their money flows, and gather evidence that will keep them behind bars for the rest of their natural lives. I thought about Clarissa and Eleanor, sitting in federal detention right now, probably still convinced they'd been the victims of some elaborate conspiracy. The irony was delicious. They tried to blackmail me with evidence of Richard's supposed crimes, not realizing they were actually threatening to expose their own ignorance about a federal investigation that had already concluded successfully. So when Eleanor said she had friends in the federal government who would be interested in Richard's activities, she was technically correct, Martinez laughed. We were very interested in his activities. Interested enough to give him a commendation and authorize payment of $2.3 million in consulting fees for his cooperation. My head snapped up. Payment. Cooperating witnesses in financial crimes cases receive compensation for their assistance, especially when that assistance leads to significant asset seizures. Richard earned every penny of that money by risking his life to help us take down some genuinely dangerous people. She pulled out bank records showing the payments, all official and documented, all completely legitimate. So when you inherited Richard's estate, you weren't just inheriting the profits from his business empire. You were inheriting payment for his service to his country. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Richard had accomplished. While his family saw him as a stern businessman who'd gotten lucky, he'd actually been a patriot who'd risked everything to help bring down criminals. There's one more thing, Martinez said, her tone shifting to something more serious. The people Richard helped us arrest, some of them have associates who are still out there. Associates who might not be happy about losing $347 million and seeing their friends go to prison. A chill ran down my spine. Are you saying I'm in danger? I'm saying you should be careful. Use security, vary your routines, be aware of your surroundings. Most of these people are smart enough to know that revenge wouldn't bring their money back, but not all criminals are smart. As I left the federal building that day, I realized that Richard hadn't just left me a fortune, he'd left me a legacy. A legacy of justice, of choosing to do the right thing even when it was dangerous, of using whatever advantages you had to make the world a better place. My wife had called me useless. My mother-in-law had called me a parasite. But Richard had called me worthy. And he'd been right all along. 6 months later, the mansion didn't feel like Richard's house anymore. It felt like home. My home. I'd redecorated the place from top to bottom, replacing Eleanor's gaudy taste with something that actually reflected who I was instead of who I was supposed to impress. The library had become my office, filled with plans for my newest project, and Richard's old study was now something I was particularly proud of. The Whitmore Foundation for Family Integrity wasn't just some tax write-off charity. It was my chance to help other people who'd been screwed over by greedy relatives and manipulative spouses. Men and women who'd been discarded like yesterday's garbage when they were no longer useful. People who needed legal help to fight back against family members who thought love was conditional on bank account balances. We'd already helped dozens of cases. Wives whose husbands had hidden assets during divorce proceedings. Adult children whose parents had been manipulated into changing their wills by gold-digging caregivers. People like me, who'd been written off as worthless until they proved otherwise. Clarissa was doing 18 months in federal prison for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. Eleanor got 2 years for the same charges plus obstruction of justice. Their letters arrived every week like clockwork, desperate pleas for forgiveness, promises that they'd changed, explanations about how prison had taught them the error of their ways. I never opened them. The woman who'd called her husband useless was probably sharing a cell with someone who'd appreciate that kind of irony. The mother-in-law who'd thought she could buy her way out of any problem had discovered that federal judges don't accept bribes or take personal checks. Sometimes I'd stand on the balcony where Richard used to watch the sunset, holding a glass of his favorite whiskey and thinking about how much had changed. The scared, broken man who'd packed his life into 2 suitcases was gone, replaced by someone who understood his own worth. Charles had been right about one thing. Sometimes the pawn really does become the king. And this king? This king wasn't interested in ruling through fear or money or manipulation. I was building something better than an empire. I was building a legacy that would have made Richard proud. I stood in the dusty shop that once belonged to my late uncle, my eyes taking in the faded shelves and forgotten trinkets that whispered secrets of a bygone era. At that very moment, I heard the sharp sound of laughter, Rachel's laughter. She stood by the counter, her head thrown back as if amused by some private joke, her words cutting deep despite the fragile calm in my heart. "Enjoy your inheritance of junk," she had sneered, her voice dripping with a venom I never thought I would taste. "My new boyfriend has a mansion and money." Each word felt like a deliberate stab at something I could not quite name, yet in that moment, anger did not rise as it should have. Instead, I managed a small, almost defeated smile and murmured, "Thank you." I could see the shock in her eyes. She expected devastation, tears, and desperate pleas for forgiveness, or even a cry for her to stay. But I was strangely empty, unresponsive to the cruelty of her farewell. With a quick motion, she snatched up her suitcase, slammed the door behind her, and walked away, leaving behind an echo of laughter and a deep, piercing void in my chest. I felt as if every step she took was erasing part of a shared past that I could never reclaim. That night, as the shop fell silent except for the creaking of old floorboards and the soft whisper of wind through broken windows, I remained. I took solace in the gentle act of dusting off my uncle's abandoned office, a small room cluttered with memories and mysteries. My hands, roughened by years of working with tools and lost hopes, brushed against a hidden drawer in the far corner. Something unusual caught my attention. With cautious curiosity, I pulled it open and found a small, antique key resting atop a folded, yellowed note. My heart quickened as I unfolded the fragile paper. The note was penned in my uncle's unmistakable handwriting, each stroke heavy with meaning and purpose. The words sent a shiver down my spine. "If you found this, you are ready. Follow the key and trust your instincts." I paused, the sound of my own breathing loud in the stillness of that neglected space. The note, the key, these were clues, remnants of a secret life my uncle had led, now left in my reluctant care. I felt as if the universe had conspired to deliver me this legacy, a mystery wrapped in the remnants of his past. As I held the cold metal of the key in my palm, its weight seemed to anchor me to a destiny I had never sought but now could not escape. I ran my fingers along its intricate design, each notch and curve a promise of secrets waiting to be unraveled. The shop around me seemed to lean in, as if listening to the silent conversation between memory and fate. In that long, heavy moment, I realized that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. The key was not just a tool. It was an invitation to step into a world of hidden truths, where every object in this neglected shop could tell a story, and every shadow might conceal a new beginning. I closed my eyes for a fleeting second, trying to gather my scattered thoughts, and when I opened them, I was ready. The laughter that had once filled the room with bitterness now echoed as a distant memory, drowned out by the pulsing call of mystery and destiny. I took a deep breath, and with the key still warm in my hand, I stepped further into the murk of the past, determined to follow the cryptic message and uncover the legacy my uncle had left behind. I clutched the old key tightly in my hand as I made my way back to the dusty office behind the shop. The faint scent of old paper and musty wood filled the air, and every step I took echoed like a quiet heartbeat in the silence. I searched every inch of that cramped room, my eyes straining to see any detail that might have been overlooked during all those years. Then, in the far corner of the office, I noticed a faint outline on the wall, a barely visible seam that seemed different from the rest. My heart pounded as I approached it, feeling the pull of something hidden, something that had been waiting just for me. I set the key against the outline, my hand trembling as I found a small keyhole concealed in the crevices of the old plaster. With a slow, deliberate motion, I turned the key. A sharp, metallic click rang out in the stillness, and the wall shuddered as a section slowly swung inward. Beyond the moving barrier lay a secret room, untouched by time and filled with the relics of a life I had only begun to understand. Dust motes danced in the slanting light as I stepped inside, my eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and trepidation. Every surface of the hidden room seemed to tell a story. Shelves lined the walls, each laden with gold coins that glimmered softly, ancient scrolls wrapped in faded cloth, and rare artifacts that whispered of distant lands and forgotten times. My gaze wandered to a pedestal standing proudly in the center of the room. Resting atop, it was an ornate box covered in strange symbols, its intricate designs inviting me to uncover its secrets. I felt as though I had been pulled into a mystery much larger than I could have ever imagined. Drawn by an irresistible urge, I reached out and ran my fingers along the cold surface of the box. As I did, I discovered a hidden compartment beneath it. There, almost as if it were placed there deliberately, lay an old leather-bound journal. The pages inside were filled with the familiar handwriting of my uncle, each word etched with care and hidden meaning. I flipped through the pages slowly, reading every line as if it were a letter meant only for me. The journal was more than just a record of his thoughts. It was a map, a guide, and a warning all rolled into one. Each entry deepened the mystery, making my pulse quicken with anticipation. My eyes stopped at the very last page where, in bold, almost desperate handwriting, were 6 words that made my stomach churn. You must find the heart's pieces. In that moment, every puzzle piece began to fall into place. My uncle had not simply been collecting old relics. He had been chasing something extraordinary, a legacy hidden in the folds of time and steeped in danger. The secret room, the artifacts, the ornate box, and now this journal. All of it pointed to a journey that would take me far beyond the quiet confines of our old shop. I stood in the dim light, feeling the weight of destiny on my shoulders. Each object in that secret room called out to me, urging me to look deeper, to trust in the hidden clues my uncle had left behind. It was as if the room itself was alive, its silence speaking volumes about the secrets it held. I slowly ran my fingers over the journal's cracked cover, knowing that its pages would guide me into a world of hidden treasures and ancient mysteries. In that quiet moment, surrounded by relics of the past, I felt a stirring of hope. The key in my hand, the journal in my grasp, and the secret room behind me all whispered of a future filled with adventure and the chance to unlock secrets that had long been buried. With a deep, steadying breath, I stepped further into that room, determined to follow every clue and uncover the hidden legacy my uncle had left behind, knowing full well that my life was about to change forever. I still remember that restless night after the secret room was revealed, a night when every sound and shadow held a hidden meaning. I had barely left the hidden chamber with the ornate box and my uncle's leather-bound journal when I felt a chill crawling along my spine. The echo of his parting words, "You must find the heart's pieces," resonated inside me like a solemn promise. As I stepped back into the main part of the shop, the familiar creaks of the old wooden floorboards seemed to whisper warnings that I was not alone. Every gust of wind outside carried an eerie hush, and every dark corner of the shop appeared to hide a secret. I made my way toward the front door, my mind reeling with unanswered questions. The cool night air brushed past me, stirring memories of quieter times before my life was upturned by this strange inheritance. Yet, something felt off. When I reached the door, I noticed that the lock, once a symbol of safety, bore deep, jagged scratches. It was as if someone had tried to force their way in, leaving behind a message meant only for me. My heart pounded harder, and a heavy dread settled over me like a thick fog. I knew that I was being watched. I paused and slowly turned around, scanning the darkened street beyond the glass of the shop's front window. In the flickering glow of a nearby street lamp, I caught a glimpse of a lone figure lingering on the sidewalk, a shadow that moved with a cautious, deliberate gait. Its presence sent a shiver through me, and for a long, tense moment, I wondered if this stranger was friend or foe. My mind raced. Could it be a rival treasure hunter, another seeker of the heart's pieces? Or was it someone connected to my uncle's long-hidden past? I had no answers, only the cold certainty that my discovery had stirred something dangerous. With my heart still hammering in my chest, I retreated back into the dusty confines of the shop, where I locked the door behind me with trembling hands. I settled into a rickety wooden chair near an old table and opened the journal once more, determined to decipher the cryptic notes scrawled in my uncle's familiar handwriting. The pages revealed a maze of hints, names, dates, and mysterious symbols that hinted at an ancient legacy and a world of secrets beyond my comprehension. I read and reread each line, trying to piece together a map that could lead me safely through this newfound labyrinth of danger and destiny. The soft sound of footsteps outside jolted me from my reverie, and I froze, every muscle tense with alertness. I could hear the faintest shuffle near the door, as if someone was circling the shop, testing the lock, or simply watching from the shadows. I clenched the journal close to my chest, feeling its weight as a reminder of the quest ahead. I wondered if my uncle had ever expected me to face such perils when he entrusted me with his secrets. Perhaps he, too, had once felt the terror of being stalked by unseen eyes and the pressure of a destiny thrust upon him. My thoughts swirled as I sat there, the quiet of the night broken only by the occasional creak of the old building and the distant murmur of a passing car. I could almost feel the presence of that mysterious watcher pressing against the thin veil of night, daring me to step outside and confront the unknown. Instead, I resolved to stay inside a little longer, gathering my courage and piecing together the scattered clues from the journal. I traced my finger over the faded ink, silently promising myself that I would follow every lead, even if it meant risking my life, to protect the legacy that my uncle had left behind. In that long, fragile moment of solitude, I realized that my journey was no longer just about uncovering hidden relics or solving old puzzles. It was a test of my will, a challenge to confront the darkness that threatened to overtake me. The scratch on the lock, the solitary figure outside, and the cryptic words in the journal all merged into one undeniable truth. I was being drawn into a mystery that would change everything. And with that understanding, I knew that there was no turning back. Every step forward would bring me closer to answers, and perhaps to danger, but I had to move ahead, no matter the cost. I clutched the ancient compass in my trembling hand, its surface cold and etched with mysterious symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light of my uncle's hidden room. The moment my fingers brushed its ornate metal, a surge of energy shot through my body, sending my heart racing and my mind into a whirl of thoughts and emotions. I remembered my uncle's hushed whispers about destiny and secrets that lay hidden beneath the layers of our seemingly mundane lives. The compass spun wildly for a few agonizing moments before settling, its needle pointing unwaveringly in one direction. This silent command was both terrifying and exhilarating, as if it were beckoning me to leave behind everything I once knew and embark on a journey into the unknown. Leaving the secret room, I stepped back into the cluttered shop with a new sense of purpose. The air felt charged, and every creak of the old wooden floor echoed the call of adventure that now thrummed through my veins. I carefully tucked the compass into my jacket pocket, feeling its pulse as if it shared my own heartbeat. With each deliberate step, memories of past doubts and quiet routines melted away, replaced by a burning curiosity to discover the long-hidden truth behind the heart of eternity, a mystery my uncle had guarded so zealously. I spent hours that first night poring over the ancient map found among the relics of the secret room. The fragile paper, yellowed by time, depicted distant lands and cryptic symbols that hinted at a secret waiting to be unveiled. In the soft glow of a single lamp, I traced the intricate lines with my finger, feeling as though the map itself was guiding me toward a destiny intertwined with my own. One particular mark, a ruined monastery deep in the Scottish Highlands, captured my attention, drawing a direct line from the steady pull of the compass to a place where history and myth converged. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I set out on the first leg of my journey, my car carrying me along winding roads that cut through ancient woodlands and mist-shrouded valleys. The landscape transformed with every mile. Rolling hills gave way to craggy cliffs and narrow passes flanked by towering trees. The steady hum of the engine blended with the natural chorus of rustling leaves and distant bird calls, each sound reinforcing the quiet determination that now filled me. Every turn on the road felt charged with meaning, as if I were following footsteps laid out by time itself. I recalled my uncle's parting words, "Follow the key and trust your instincts." Now, as the compass's needle held steadfast, I trusted that inner voice guiding me toward the relic that promised both wonder and peril. The road was not without its challenges. I encountered narrow stretches along steep cliff edges, where the drop below was shrouded in swirling mists and the silence was broken only by the rush of wind. In those moments of solitude and quiet danger, I found strength in the simple truth that my journey was more than a search for lost treasures. It was a quest for meaning, a passage into the unknown where every moment held the potential for transformation. Under a star-punctured sky during a brief pause at a lonely roadside rest, I sat silently reflecting on the path ahead. The compass, resting securely in my pocket, seemed to emit a gentle, reassuring warmth. Its quiet pulse matched the rhythm of my own heart, forging a connection between the present and the promise of ancient secrets waiting to be discovered. As I gazed upward, the endless expanse of the night sky filled me with a deep sense of both wonder and resolve. With the break of dawn, the horizon blushed with hues of lavender and soft gold. I knew that today, the journey would gain new momentum, carrying me ever closer to that fabled monastery and the secrets it harbored. Clutching the compass tightly, I stepped into my car and drove forward, leaving behind the familiar and embracing the thrilling uncertainty of the road. Each mile brought me closer to a destiny written long ago, a path paved by mysteries and the silent, enduring promise of the heart's power. I arrived in Scotland under a sky heavy with gray clouds and a biting chill that made every breath feel like a struggle. The ancient monastery, perched on a rugged cliff overlooking a turbulent sea, loomed before me like a relic from a forgotten time. Its stone walls, weathered and crumbling, told stories of ages past, each crack and crevice a silent witness to centuries of hardship and mystery. I stepped through the heavy, creaking door, where the cold, stale air of the interior embraced me like an unwelcome ghost. Inside, narrow corridors stretched out into darkness, lit only by the faint, wavering light that seeped through shattered windows. Every footstep I took echoed along the stone floor, mingling with my own anxious heartbeat and the distant sound of wind howling outside. Clutching my uncle's worn journal, its pages filled with cryptic sketches and notes about the heart of eternity, I let its faded words guide me deeper into the labyrinthine passages of the monastery. The journal's instructions pointed me toward a secret hidden within these ancient walls, a secret that pulsed with danger and possibility. As I moved through twisting passageways, the oppressive air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to whisper long-forgotten secrets. The atmosphere was heavy, and every creak of the old building heightened my senses, making it feel as if I were being watched by unseen eyes. After what seemed like an eternity wandering through narrow halls, I finally discovered a secluded chamber at the heart of the monastery. In the center of the room stood a hidden altar, carved from stone and adorned with intricate patterns worn smooth by time. Resting atop the altar was a leather-bound book whose cover was cracked and edges frayed. its pages brimmed with detailed sketches and writings chronicling the mysteries of the heart of eternity. The book exuded an aura of ancient power, a silent promise of knowledge and danger intertwined. I stepped closer, drawn by an irresistible compulsion to understand the secrets that had so haunted my uncle's past. Just as I reached out to caress the book's worn cover, a sudden movement in the darkness made me freeze. Out of the murky shadows emerged a hooded man, his eyes glinting with a sharp, calculating light beneath the low brim of his hood. His voice, deep and measured, broke the silence with a single, chilling command. "You shouldn't be here." In that split second, before I could utter a word, he lunged at me with alarming speed. The force of his attack set off a hidden mechanism within the ancient structure. The entire monastery trembled as if it were awakening from a long slumber. Stones began to fall, and the floor beneath me cracked open, revealing a yawning chasm shrouded in darkness. In the chaos, my eyes caught a glimmer of light emanating from the depths of the newly revealed chamber. Amid the swirling dust and falling debris, I saw it, a shard pulsing with a soft, eerie glow. With a surge of desperate determination, I leaped forward and grasped the cool, smooth surface of the shard. The moment my fingers closed around it, a powerful energy coursed through my body. Visions overwhelmed my mind. Raging fires, scenes of utter destruction, and flashes of an immense, mysterious power that both terrified and mesmerized me. In the midst of this sensory onslaught, a single, ghostly whisper echoed in my thoughts. "It is not meant to be whole." For a long, suspended moment, time seemed to slow as I stood there, the shard pulsing steadily in my grasp like a heartbeat. The hooded man halted his advance and observed me with an unreadable expression, while the very walls of the monastery shuddered in response to the tumult. The leather-bound book on the altar lay forgotten as the magnitude of what had just occurred sank in. In that heartbeat of eternity, I realized that my life was irrevocably altered. The shard was not merely a fragment of an ancient relic. It was a beacon of fate, a tangible piece of the heart of eternity that held the key to mysteries and dangers beyond my wildest imaginings. Gathering every ounce of courage, I took a hesitant step forward. I knew that the quest for the remaining pieces of the heart was now a race against time, a perilous journey that would test my resolve and challenge. The cold, misty silence of the monastery, the fallen stones, and even the oppressive weight of destiny itself bore witness to this turning point. Clasping the shard tightly, I steeled myself to venture deeper into the unknown recesses of the ancient building, aware that every moment could bring further revelations or greater perils. With the shard's quiet pulse guiding me like the beat of a hidden drum, I moved forward into the darkness, determined to unravel the legacy my uncle had entrusted to me, even if it meant facing the most unfathomable dangers that lay ahead. I raced through the cold stone corridors of the ruined monastery, my heart pounding so fiercely I was sure the sound would alert any lurking enemy. I barely had time to catch my breath when the hooded man reappeared from the dark recesses of the building. His eyes, filled with a cruel determination, locked onto mine as he advanced steadily. I clutched the shard, the first piece of the heart, tightly in my hand, its cool glow a silent promise of both power and peril. In that moment, I realized that my life had been irreversibly changed, and I was now entangled in a dangerous pursuit that left no room for retreat. I bolted out of the monastery through a narrow, crumbling exit, the hooded man in hot pursuit. His presence was like a shadow that clung to my every step, and with each passing second, I felt the weight of his intent pressing closer. I managed to escape into the murky twilight of the Scottish countryside, where the dense fog swallowed the path ahead. I slowed only when I reached a hidden alley behind the ancient structure, desperate to catch my breath and gather my thoughts. It was there, in the relative safety of solitude, that I first heard a low, measured voice behind me. "Marcus Vale," the voice stated, cold and unwavering. I turned sharply to see a man emerging from the gloom, a man whose reputation had preceded him. Marcus Vale was a ruthless treasure hunter, known for his relentless pursuit of rare relics, and he was not one to let obstacles, or unwilling heirs like me, stand in his way. His eyes glinted with the promise of violence and greed as he stepped forward. I felt a surge of dread, but also a strange resolve. I had spent years living in the shadow of my uncle's secrets, and now, faced with this living embodiment of greed, I could not falter. Barely managing to form a response, I recalled the wisdom of Dr. Adrian Cole, the historian who had become my reluctant mentor. I had turned to him as soon as I clutched the shard, a desperate bid to understand the symbols and the legacy hidden in my uncle's journal. Dr. Cole's grim analysis had connected the mysterious symbols to a long-forgotten sunken temple in Greece, where the second piece of the heart was rumored to lie hidden. His warning echoed in my mind. If the second piece was indeed there, I would not be the only one seeking it. Marcus Vale's presence now confirmed that I was treading a treacherous path. A race against time, and a rival whose only aim was to seize the power of the heart for himself. Marcus took a step closer, his gaze never leaving mine, and I knew that words would soon give way to a violent clash. With my heart hammering in my chest, I bolted again, determined to put as much distance as possible between us. My feet pounded against the uneven cobblestones as I dashed through narrow lanes and over crumbling walls. The sound of Marcus's heavy steps echoed behind me, a grim reminder that every second counted. In the midst of the chase, I could only think of Dr. Cole's solemn advice and the cryptic maps that promised further clues hidden in the depths of the Mediterranean. I needed to reach a safe haven where I could plan my next move, and that thought propelled me forward even as exhaustion threatened to overtake me. I found refuge in an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of a small village, its broken windows and creaking door offering little protection from the storm of my thoughts. Once inside, I collapsed onto a threadbare cot, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving me with a cold, numbing dread. I knew Marcus would not relent, and that he was as relentless in his quest as I was in my desperate search for answers. The shard in my hand pulsed softly, a constant reminder of the legacy I had inherited and the dangerous journey that lay ahead. As I sat in the dim light of the farmhouse, I allowed myself a brief moment to process the enormity of my situation. I was now locked in a dangerous pursuit, not just for ancient relics and hidden treasures, but for the truth that could shatter or save everything I once held dear. Every decision from this point forward was a matter of life and death, and I could only hope that the lessons of the past and the clues left by my uncle would be enough to guide me through the perils that Marcus Vale and his ruthless ambitions had set in motion. The chase had only just begun, and I realized with a sinking heart that there was no turning back from the dangerous road ahead. I arrived in Greece with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions. The journey had taken me far from the familiar landscapes of Scotland, and now I stood on a rocky shore where ancient whispers mingled with the relentless crashing of waves against jagged cliffs. I had hired Luca, a local diver with a steady hand and quiet confidence, to guide me to a sunken temple that legends claimed housed the second shard of the heart. As the boat sliced through the dark water, the air was thick with salt and silent anticipation, and every ripple seemed to carry hints of secrets buried in the deep. Luca's calm eye surveyed the horizon as he readied his diving gear, and with a simple nod, he motioned for me to join him in the small inflatable dinghy. I clutched the worn leather pouch containing my first shard, a reminder of the dangerous journey I had already endured. Feeling its cool weight against my chest as we moved steadily away from the shore, the sea grew eerily calm as we neared the coordinates marked on the faded map my uncle had left behind. Slowly, the outline of a vast, forgotten structure emerged from the depths, a temple swallowed by time and the relentless pull of the ocean. Its crumbling stone columns, softened by centuries of water, rose like silent sentinels guarding mysteries long concealed. My heart pounded as Luca guided the dinghy toward the submerged ruin. Once we reached the temple's entrance, he secured our vessel and helped me into his diving suit. The transition from the warm air above to the cool, shadowed world beneath was jarring, and as I submerged, the light of the sun dimmed to a faint glow filtered through the water. We swam along a narrow passageway into the temple's interior, where the silence was profound and every movement echoed in the still water. Beams of light broke through gaps in the stone ceiling, illuminating a circular chamber that held a quiet majesty. At the center of the room, a stone pedestal supported the second shard of the heart. Its surface shimmered with an unearthly glow, pulsing softly as though it possessed a heartbeat of its own. The sight of the relic filled me with both wonder and a deep, inexplicable dread. I moved slowly, every muscle tensed with caution, ready for whatever might emerge from the temple's dark recesses. Just as I extended my hand toward the pedestal, a sudden ripple in the water startled me. From the shadow of a crumbling wall, a serpent-like creature began to emerge. Its scales glistened with a luminous sheen, and its eyes burned with a fierce, otherworldly light. The creature's sinuous body moved with silent precision, and for a long, breathless moment, I found myself frozen in terror as I stared into its glowing gaze. Instinct and survival surged through me. I recoiled sharply as the creature lunged with astonishing speed. The water churned around me, and panic clutched at my heart. In that desperate moment, I remembered the ancient method described in my uncle's journal, a way to create a resonant sound that might scare even the most relentless foe. My eyes darted around until I spotted a metal rod wedged among debris near a fallen column. With trembling hands, I seized it and struck a nearby stone pillar with all my might. The blow reverberated through the water in a deep, resounding boom that filled the chamber and startled the creature. It recoiled sharply, its advance halted by the sudden noise. Seizing the moment, I plunged forward and grasped the second shard from its pedestal. The relic's glow intensified in my hand, a silent confirmation that I had secured another piece of the heart. The guardian serpent circled in confusion for several agonizing seconds before slipping silently back into the dark recesses of the temple. Luca's signal broke the tense silence, and together we began our ascent through the cool, shadowy water. The journey upward felt endless as I clung tightly to the shard, its otherworldly pulse a steady reminder of the legacy I now carried. Breaking through the surface, gasping in the fresh air, I was met by Luca's wide, questioning eyes. "What the hell was that?" he murmured, his voice thick with shock and awe. I could only shake my head, still reeling from the encounter with the guardian serpent, a creature that seemed to have risen straight from myth to protect secrets meant to remain hidden. As our boat rocked gently on the calm sea, I sat in a moment of heavy silence, the shard pulsing softly in my grasp. I knew that this relic, along with all those yet to be found, would lead me deeper into a mystery filled with peril and wonder, a mystery that promised to reshape my life forever. I drove through the rain-soaked streets of Athens with a heavy heart and a sense of foreboding that refused to let go. The night had been long and full of restless memories, and as I stared out at the blurred city lights, I knew that the chase was far from over. With 2 shards of the heart securely hidden away, I had finally traced the location of the third, a secret monastery in Nepal, far from the modern chaos of Europe. But before I could even consider a moment's reprieve, Marcus Vale reappeared in my life like a dark specter. This time, he was not alone. His mercenaries, cold and ruthless, swarmed the narrow back alleys of Athens. I ducked into a narrow doorway, my breath quick and ragged as I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, listening to their heavy boots echo in the distance. I clutched the pouch containing the shards, each piece pulsating with a mysterious, almost tangible power. I remembered my uncle's fading words and the long nights spent poring over his journal. I had thought I was ready for this dangerous quest, yet nothing could have prepared me for the betrayal that was about to unfold. As I navigated the labyrinthine streets, trying to lose my pursuers in the maze of ancient ruins and modern buildings, my mind raced with questions. What drove Marcus Vale to such lengths? Was it the promise of power, or was there something more personal in his relentless pursuit of the heart? The answers remained as murky as the midnight sky over Athens. I finally found a safe haven in a small, run-down safe house on the outskirts of the city, a crumbling apartment that reeked of dampness and lost hope. I sank onto a threadbare chair, trying to steady my pounding heart and piece together my next move. It was there, in the suffocating silence of that dark room, that I heard the footsteps again. The sound was deliberate, echoing down the hall as if the walls themselves were betraying me. I raced to the window and peered out, my eyes straining in the gloom. There, standing under the weak glow of a street lamp, was Marcus Vale, his face obscured by shadows and a cold smile that promised nothing but destruction. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. I recalled how, Just a few days before, I had trusted him, believing that his knowledge of the ancient relics might help me piece together my uncle's scattered clues. But trust is a fragile thing when ambitions clash. In that moment, I felt the heavy weight of my loss. Before I could react, the door burst open, and masked men stormed in, their intentions as clear as the glint in their eyes. They overpowered me with brutal efficiency, and in the ensuing struggle, I felt a cold, metallic sensation as one of them snatched the pouch from my grasp. The shards, symbols of my legacy and my only hope of uncovering the truth behind the heart, were ripped away from me. I fought desperately, throwing punches and yelling in vain protest, but the numbers were against me. Amid the chaos, Marcus Vale stepped forward, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity as he surveyed his ill-gotten prize. His betrayal was complete. He had turned against me at the very moment when the pieces of the puzzle should have come together. I watched in disbelief as he gathered the shards, each one pulsating with an eerie light, and then he vanished into the night with his mercenaries in tow. Left alone in that dark, suffocating room, I sank to the floor in despair. The room, once a refuge, now felt like a tomb holding the remnants of my shattered trust and dreams. My heart pounded in my ears as I struggled to accept the harsh reality. I had been betrayed by someone I had once considered an ally. But even as the betrayal stung, a deeper resolve began to kindle within me. I remembered my uncle's voice, urging me to protect our legacy at all costs, and I knew that giving up was not an option. In the stillness of that moment, as the rain drummed against the window and my breath came in ragged gasps, I vowed that I would reclaim what was stolen. The journey was far from over, and though Marcus Vale's treachery had struck a devastating blow, I was determined to press on. I would follow the clues, trust in the memory of my uncle, and journey to Nepal to find the hidden monastery that held the promise of the third shard. Even in the face of betrayal, my quest for the truth of the heart burned brighter than ever, fueling a determination that refused to be extinguished, no matter how dark the night became. I found myself deep in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, where the humid air pressed against my skin and the ancient trees whispered secrets of a past long forgotten. I had tracked Marcus Vale through winding jungle paths and murky streams until I arrived at a hidden clearing, a place that held the final piece of the heart. Before me, in a ruined stone structure overtaken by vines and moss, Marcus stood beside a weathered pedestal. On that pedestal lay the final shard, its surface pulsing with a soft, eerie glow that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. As I watched from behind a clump of ferns, my pulse quickened. Marcus's eyes were fixed on the relic, and his expression shifted from determination to something like despair. I could see the final piece clicking into place with the other shards he had collected, forming a whole that shimmered with an otherworldly light. For a long, heart-stopping moment, the jungle fell silent except for the distant call of unseen creatures and the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. The assembled heart radiated power that rippled through the air, and I felt the earth tremble underfoot. The light it emitted was both beautiful and terrifying, casting shifting shadows on the crumbling walls of the ancient ruin. Then, as if the relic had awakened a force beyond human control, the ground began to shake violently. The once still clearing erupted with a roar as the power of the heart surged outward, its energy shaking the very foundations of the jungle. Marcus's scream rang out, a cry of agony and shock, as he staggered backwards. I knew in that moment that the heart was not a source of salvation, but a curse that brought only destruction. The air around me buzzed with raw energy, and every instinct screamed that nothing good could come from such concentrated power. I recalled the countless nights I had spent poring over my uncle's journal, absorbing his warnings and piecing together clues that now led me to this fateful crossroads. His gentle voice and determined eyes had once given me strength, and now, facing the reality of the heart's terrible power, I realized that I alone held the choice to change its destiny. With my heart pounding and hands trembling, I stepped out of the shadows. Each footstep felt heavy as I advanced slowly toward the pedestal, the light of the heart reflecting in my eyes. Marcus, still reeling from the shock, tried to regain control, but the assembled relic pulsed with an intensity that threatened to consume us both. I could feel its energy tugging at my very soul, as if urging me to harness its power, yet my instincts screamed that its power was a poison meant to corrupt. I knew that if I allowed it to remain whole, the curse would spread far beyond this ruined temple, endangering everything I held dear. Time seemed to slow as I reached out a shaking hand toward the heart. In that charged moment, every lesson from my past, every word of warning from my uncle, and every ounce of courage I possessed converged into a single, decisive thought. I could not let Marcus, nor anyone else, become a slave to this ancient curse. I had to end its cycle of pain and destruction. As I stood before the relic, the jungle around me roared with a rising crescendo of natural fury, a final, desperate warning from nature itself. I raised my hand, and, with a deep, steadying breath, I grasped the assembled heart. In that instant, a blinding flash of light exploded around us, and the raw, untamed energy surged through my veins like a tidal wave. The very ground beneath us cracked and splintered, and the oppressive force of the heart pressed upon my chest. Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief as the relic's light grew impossibly bright. Without a second thought, I made my choice. I pulled back with all my strength, releasing the heart from my grasp so that it could crash onto the cold, hard stone of the pedestal. The impact was immediate and cataclysmic. The heart shattered into countless fragments, its searing light splintering into the dark canopy above and fading into nothingness. A deep, resonant silence fell over the clearing as the tremors subsided. Marcus sank to his knees, his anguished cries swallowed by the hushed jungle, while I stood there, heart heavy with loss and relief. I had chosen to destroy the relic rather than allow its cursed power to corrupt our world. In that moment, I understood that my journey had never been about gaining strength from the relic. It was about protecting the legacy my uncle had left behind, even if it meant sacrificing what many would call power. As I gazed upon the scattered shards and the ruined pedestal, the weight of my choice settled upon me. I knew that life would never be the same, and the scars of this day would mark me forever. Yet, I also felt a quiet resolve, a promise that I would honor my uncle's memory and guard against the lure of dangerous power, no matter the cost. I had never felt so small and yet so determined in all my life. The chaos of the ruins and the echo of Marcus's screams still lingered in the heavy air around me. I stood among the scattered remnants of the heart, a powerful relic that had promised so much but brought only ruin. The blast of its shattered light had almost consumed me, but in that final moment I made a choice. I chose to destroy the heart, to break its cursed hold forever, even if it meant my own soul would be marked by the loss of its power. I could feel the cold stone beneath my feet tremble as the shards of the relic lay scattered in every direction. The energy that had once pulsed like a living thing was now quiet, and the heavy silence that followed spoke louder than any cry of agony. As I slowly regained my senses in the aftermath, I turned to see the ruin around me begin to collapse. The temple, which had once stood as a silent guardian of secrets, now crumbled into dust and echoes. Every stone that fell was a reminder of the danger the heart had brought into our world. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of all that had happened. Memories of my uncle, his gentle guidance and firm belief in protecting our legacy flooded my mind. I recalled the long nights spent reading his journal and the promise in his eyes when he spoke of treasures that were more than wealth. They were truths that had to be guarded. With each passing moment, the chaos grew. The ground shook, and I knew that nature itself was rebelling against the cursed relic. I could no longer stand by and let this force endanger everything I loved. I raised my hand, and in that moment of clarity, I felt the strength of my resolve. I had to make things right. The power that Marcus Vale had sought, the power that threatened to corrupt and destroy, was not meant for any one man. Clenching my jaw, I stepped forward, determined to seal away the darkness that had tainted the heart. I gathered the shards carefully, avoiding the dangerous remnants of their energy, and with a steady hand, I cast them into a deep, hidden chasm revealed by the collapsing temple. As I watched the fragments vanish into the abyss, a wave of relief washed over me. The relic was no longer whole. Its cursed promise was broken. In that quiet moment after the chaos, I realized that my journey was not just about a relic, but about understanding my own heart. The legacy of my uncle was not in the cursed object itself, but in the lessons he had taught me about love, loss, and the courage to do what is right. I thought of Rachel, her laughter that once cut deep, and wondered if somewhere, beyond the pain and betrayal, there might be a path back to forgiveness and new beginnings. The ruins of the temple slowly gave way to nature's reclaiming touch as vines and earth began to cover the scars of the past. I knew the world was healing, and in that healing, I saw hope. I walked for hours under the gentle warmth of the emerging sun, each step taking me further away from the horrors of the ruined temple. The forest whispered its own stories as I passed. The rustle of leaves and the murmur of distant waters created a soft, natural hymn. I sensed my uncle's spirit in every gentle breeze, urging me to keep moving and to find meaning in every hardship. I recalled his kind voice and steady gaze, and the wisdom he left behind in his journal, which filled me with a quiet strength. He had once told me that every treasure in life comes with a price, and that the true worth of an inheritance is measured not in riches but in the lessons learned along the way. My thoughts turned to Marcus Vale, a man whose greed had nearly torn apart the delicate balance of fate. In his eyes, I saw not only ambition but a desperate hunger for control over forces never meant to be mastered. His betrayal was a harsh lesson in the cruelty that can arise when power is pursued without wisdom. Yet, in that betrayal, I found clarity. I realized that my journey was not about competing for power, but about choosing the right path for the future. The relic was a symbol of the eternal struggle between greed and the human spirit, and by destroying it, I had chosen hope over despair. As the hours passed, I began to see the beauty hidden in the aftermath of chaos. The broken stones and fallen relics, once symbols of ancient power, now lay still, bathed in the soft glow of the morning light. They reminded me that even the most powerful curses can be undone by a single act of courage. With each step, I felt the weight of the past lift from my shoulders, replaced by a lightness of spirit I had not felt in years. I knew my journey would continue through trials and tribulations, yet I would face them with the strength of my convictions and the memory of my uncle's love. Now, as I enter a small village at the edge of the forest, I carry not only the pain of betrayal and loss, but also the hope of a future where truth and love prevail over darkness. Every act of kindness here reinforces my belief that even in a world filled with shadows, there is always a glimmer of light waiting to be embraced. My inheritance was never a curse. It was a reminder that true power lies in the choices we make, even when the world around us crumbles.